Little ding.
There we go.
It is my pleasure tonight to introduce our presenter, and I want to thank Jeremy for the recommendation. Dr. Thomas Loebel has authored over 40 published articles and book chapters, and I've read many of them. They're fascinating. And he currently serves as the assistant director for the Illinois Archaeological Survey. He's specializing in hunter-gatherer records of the late Pleistocene and early Holocene era. He has conducted research into the archaeology record and the Midwest of Illinois and the Midwest for over 30 years. Um, if you've read any of his stuff, yeah, I think we could have him coming back here every week for the next 5 years, and we're still just going to tap into his knowledge. So, with pleasure.
Well, thank you, Catherine, for that very generous and gracious introduction. Yeah, I guess you stick around long enough and things pile up. But thanks for the invitation to come and speak to the group, and thanks to everybody here for choosing to spend a little time with me this evening. And Jeremy, how you doing? Good to see
Pretty
you.
good. Good to see you too.
Thanks for connecting us. I've spoken to the group a couple of times over the years, and it's always been a really enjoyable experience because, one of the reasons I got into archaeology because it was a way for me to kind of interweave all of my interests in natural history, geology, human behavior. And so archaeology brings all of those things together. And Northern Illinois is a really great place to do a lot of that because we've got unique glacial landscapes. We've got great archaeology. We've got the Great Lakes and things like that. So it's a really interesting area. Um, Tonight, I thought instead of like talking like, straight archaeology, digging this site, and a lot of my talks are on late Pleistocene hunter-gatherers. So I'm really interested in the peopling of the Midwest and of the North American continent at the end of the last ice age. But in the last 10 years or so at ISAS, we have developed a remote sensing section of geophysics. And this has really revolutionized a lot of the way we can do archaeology and how we do archaeology. And so I'd just like to share a couple of, interesting, some of the instruments that we now have at our disposal. Science is great and technology is great that when it dumbs down to it gets so easy that archaeologists can use it, we're going to put that to use and have some fun with it. And we've been, with the support of IDOT, been able to get some geophysics instruments and get on some really cool sites. And when it works, sometimes it's absolutely amazing. And I'm going to share a couple of these stories with you tonight. So let's see if we can get the screen going here. All right, is that working? Everybody seeing this? Okay, so uh, it's been a while since I've given this talk, and I wanted to refresh it with a couple of the some newer things, and then some older studies, and some of the really fun results that we've had. But the way I always think about it is, it's like how do you see beneath the ground? And so geophysics and archaeological explorations in Illinois. And this is a really story about how we one, find sites, and then how do we investigate these sites um, with the mind of learning about them, but also preserving them. So let's get into it. A little bit about Catherine's already told you a little bit about myself, but I'm the assistant director of the Illinois State Archaeological Survey. We are part of the Prairie Research Institute at the University of Illinois. We are one of the statewide scientific surveys. So, along with the Natural History Survey, the Geologic Survey, the Water Survey, now the Archaeological Survey is part of that. Um, the state part of our name is a little bit misleading. in that we don't have any kind of legislative or enforcement authority with the state. We're not really connected with the state agency like the Historic Preservation Office. They're part of IDNR. What we do is we do all the archaeology for the Illinois Department of Transportation. And this is a partnership that goes back about 60 years. And it's been a very fruitful partnership in that a lot of other states, the DOTs will job all of the surveys and excavations out to multiple firms. But having it all in one place in this long-term relationship allows us to keep that expertise in one spot and have deep institutional knowledge. I've got staff working under me that, like myself, have been working in portions of the state for over 30 years. And so we know the landscape, we know the archaeology, we really care about it. Um, and we've been able to leverage this over the years and grow. We are now also the Office of the State Archaeologist, but again, this is kind of um, more of an outreach and education and a voice rather than having any legislative kind of power behind it. But what we do, this partnership with IDOT does allow us to have a lot of public and private partnerships. And so, as part of my job, I oversee the entire statewide survey. We've got 5 field stations across the state. And so, depending on where the IDOT contract goes, it will go to, if it's in Northern Illinois, it'll go to our Elgin people, or Western Illinois goes over to our Macomb or Jacksonville, or we have an office down by St. Louis. But again, we've got staff there that have been working in those areas and they really know the land. And rather than having somebody from Kansas come in who doesn't know anything about local archaeology, and our staff is out there to find these sites, evaluate them, and help IDOT preserve them if they can, and then if they can't, then we excavate them. And that we also have partnerships. I'm also the principal investigator for the Cultural Resource Management Program with the Cook County Forest Preserves. They've been a wonderful partner. They now realize that archaeology and cultural resources are one of the resources that they are tasked with managing, just like endangered plants and animals and things like that. And so this is all about land management. If we need to know where these resources are so that we can steward them. And you'll be surprised where we find them. That middle photo, sometimes we have very, very narrow places and spots to look, but right there we're excavating. There was a farmstead off to the other side, but this was a little trash feature that contained a whole bunch of pre-Civil War garbage from that early homestead. So, um, archaeology is here. It's in Northern Illinois. When we say archaeology, most people think of somewhere else, right? Pyramids, Egypt, and things like that. But we have 12,000 plus years of record of human habitation here that I think is just as interesting and research worthy as anywhere else in the world. Um, we've got lots of resources up online at our website. You can find us in the Illinois State Archaeological Survey, current projects and news, and that will bring you into. We've got lots of publications available online for purchase. We've got a new one that just came out last year, the Archaeology of Illinois, the Deep History of the Prairie State. I'm a little biased because I'm one of the authors, but it's a wonderful book. It's very detailed, but it's written to be accessible, so it's free from scientific jargon and things like that, and with a goal again of public partner and private partnerships. It's our way of giving back to the public. All right, enough of that. So let's talk about some archaeology. So, like I said, in the last 10 years or so, it was originally myself and Dr. Bob McCullough who established the geophysics section. Then Bob took it over and has done a great job running it. He just recently retired, and we're passing it on to a younger staff. But that's good. That's the way it should go. But you've probably heard, so I can say geophysics and it's also remote sensing. So these are ways of investigating sites using passive and active equipment that allow us to kind of get a picture of what's under the ground without actually having to throw a shovel in it. Now, how do we find sites, right? Uh, this is why I'm interested in geophysics because this is what I always wanted as a kid, right? And these instruments are now as close as I can get to the X-ray vision goggles, right? That you know, ordered out of the back of the comic books way back in the day. Um, but how do we find sites? We have to go look for them. Okay, so we can do traditional methodology like pedestrian survey, walking over areas like plowed fields to look for signs of historic and prehistoric habitation that the plow has turned up and exposed. This is a field school that I ran out in Henry County where I had students out, and we basically just very slowly walked this field. And every time we found something, we dropped a flag, and you can see all those little red flags all over the place. Those are marking the scatter of the artifact, and that's how we defined the extent of the site. So we do this when we get a project for IDOT to go out and survey the right of way. And if we can see this ground surface, we'll do pedestrian survey. If we can't, and sometimes we're doing shovel testing, and our projects don't wait for weather or season. and so sometimes we're out doing methodical shovel testing. This is my poor crew in this last winter out in the Cook County Forest Preserve in advance of a bike path that was going through. These projects have deadlines, so we've got to get out there sometimes, do that survey so that we can tell them you're clear, or hey, you've got something here that you might want to redesign and loop that path around if you can. Um, and then other times, but traditionally we use these kind of methods like the distribution of things on the surface or what we can see in little subsurface samples that direct us to sites. So like here's a well from a late 1800s farmstead that again we just saw some scatter of artifacts and brick on the surface that we define like concentrations. And then we go out with a backhoe and we remove that top disturbed plowed layer and get down to right at that subsoil contact to define what we call features. And features can be basically pits, wells, cellars, outbuildings, foundations, and in prehistoric times, um, pretty much the same thing. A lot of this is, in 1800s, there was no garbage man that came around, right? So trash disposal facilities, what people did with their trash. Great thing is, so I'm kind of like a prehistoric garbage man, but the great thing is garbage really tells you what people were doing, how they lived. And so this is what we're after, right? That tells a story about the what happened at that site. But we have to go look for these sites. And sometimes in the past, it's involved heavy mechanical work and or laborious shovel testing and things like that. And sometimes it's a little bit of luck, and we'll take all the help that we can get. We get a little friends visiting every now and then. Um, but it's, you have to go out and systematically look for these things to find the sites. Geophysics kind of now helps us greatly because it helps us to hone in and target sites. We now can see sometimes exactly where to dig instead of you can see how much we had stripped with a backhoe out there. This is very expensive, right? You get about three archaeologists for the cost of one backhoe operator per hour. But it's expensive, it's time consuming. We have to disrupt a lot of the site area to find and zoom in on these features. So geophysics helps us sometimes drop right in on things. Um, So these are a couple of the instruments that we are now regularly employing. A magnetometer or gradiometer, Bardington 6012. And that's this little goalpost looking thing here. We have a soil resistivity unit and or no, I'm sorry, this is the magnetic susceptibility, and the one in the top left is soil resistivity. We just recently got a brand new ground penetrating radar unit, which we are eager to employ. I'll I'll give a and I promise give a very brief explanation of how geophysics work. There will not be a test on this at any point later, but we'll talk about it, the gradiometer and this magnetic susceptibility, soil resistivity. And then a couple of case studies, including a site called Nadine Mounds that we isn't an IDOT rest stop. It's about 2,000 to 2,500 years old. Then we're going to go to the Noble Weeding site by Bloomington, Illinois. That's about 700, 800 years old. Then a French fort down south of St. Louis, and then Sangamo Town, which is a really cool little spot. I don't know if anybody knows why Sangamo Town is famous. All right, well, we'll leave you hanging. We'll let you know when we get to that site. But um, so really quickly, how does a gradiometer collect magnetic data? And so I think of a gradiometer as almost like a metal detector, but one that logs data so that we can display it in a spatial or horizontal map format later on. This is a passive system, and it reads the near surface magnetic fields. It's very sensitive. You can't be wearing any metal on yourself. A zipper on your pants or metal eyelets in your shoes can disrupt this machine. Um, so we often are wearing sweatpants and hoodies and things. We look like a bunch of homeless people running around with, a cans on sticks. But it's even small metal objects can emit a weak magnetic field. Things that are burned, thermal remnant, have a magnetic signature that could be different from the immediate surrounding signature. So, like a campfire, you burn a campfire, all of that ground underneath the campfire gets heated up, and essentially the polarity of those atoms and the magnetic signature of those soil will reorient and have a magnetic signature. So we can pick up burn surfaces of burning events, campfires and things like that. And you dig a big pit in it, and then it gets filled with a disrupted mixed soil that also will have a weakly different magnetic signature than surrounding soil. And so it allows us to um, record what we call these dipole responses. So this little diagram here, which shows these little black and white things, these are disruptive, either an object or a burn surface or a area of disrupted soil that we are then able to detect and map. Okay. So the EMI, the EM38, is an active system. This system has two parts. It has a transmitter and it has a receiver. It will actually produce a magnetic field, which then goes down into the ground, the near surface. Most of these instruments are good for anywhere from 1 to 4 feet in depth, maybe sometimes deeper, depending on the soil properties. But it this one's an interesting one. It measures the ability of a soil to be magnetically induced or electrically stimulated. These are properties of soil which can be enhanced by human activity. So, uh, the humans are messy. We make lots of garbage. We throw our garbage into pits. We burn it. We organically enrich the areas around us through outhouses and other things like that. Microbes in the soil get into these deposits and they feed on everything, the organic matter. And essentially, in many cases, they they iron enrich the soil, going after this organic matter with their poop. So now this soil has a higher magnetic signature or a higher ability to be activated magnetically or electronically stimulated by this. And again, we can then log the data and create a map. All of these, um, people say, "Oh, that sounds so exciting." I said, "Well, kind of, but it's a lot like watching somebody mow the lawn, where really we lay grids out and we walk back and forth in a systematic manner in 50 centimeter transects to a meter transects apart, and we just collect the data systematically over these areas." So uh, the magic, the fun happens after we get to download that data and then process it and make that map and see what we get. Um, Soil resistivity. So soil can be magnetically susceptible or electronically induced. It can also, we can measure the resistance of soil to an electric current. So again, this is a Frobisher resistance meter, or so we call it soil resistivity. And these four probes, you put it in the ground, it takes its reading, and you move, your next step, take a reading, take a reading, take a reading. But it's sending out we have ground probes in the back that go way back here. Each one of these four probes then is measuring the either the impedance of a return signal, or the flow of the soil, uh, the electric stimulation in the soil. And again, so if something's there to disrupt that, like a buried object or a subsurface disruption, we can measure that, log it, and then map it. Um, I am gladder there are way smarter people out there who have figured all of this out and put the software together. And again, like, it filters down to the level where like somebody like me can go, "Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I can let them use it. This is great." So these have been really, again, this is the fun part of the job sometimes, going out um, and seeing what you get. So again, our studies here. So Nadine Mounds. This is a middle woodland burial mound complex. It's this here. Can you guys see my cursor as I'm moving it around? Okay, good. It's in an IDOT waste stop or a rest stop down in Henderson County. They wanted to go. They were widening US 34 systematically. Here you have these burial mound groups. They have to figure out, how close they can or can't get to them as part of their road redesign. But these date to about 2000 to 2500 years ago or so. Um, then we're going to talk about Noble Weeding. This is a really, really cool site. This is one of the first sites we got out with to our geophysics, new geophysics, and very expensive equipment. And so there was a lot of pressure to come up with something cool, and we did. Then we're going to go talk about again Fort Deschartres. This is a 1720 French fort. This is dates back to the time of the Illinois country. So when the French were here and controlled most of the Midwest. And this is a neat tale because there's several forts, two of which were unknown. And then last, Sangamo Town, about 1825 to 1855. Cool site. This was at once the rival capital, a rival center to be the capital of the state with Springfield. And Abraham Lincoln lived here and worked out of here in about 1830 or 1831. So it's got a Lincoln connection. This town vanished by 1855 and was lost for 50 years until one of our colleagues went back and actually found the site. All right, let's get into the geophys here. So Nadine Mounds, there was four recorded mounds in the 1950s. Again, they date to the Middle Woodland period. Uh, Mounds are sometimes some of the more obvious archaeological manifestations. Their earthworks, their constructions, and so you sometimes you can see a site, right? Other times you can't, and we'll get into that. But IDOT owns this property and is now has to manage it, and two of the mounds are fairly significant, so you can see here, and very visible. Another one is very subtle, and we couldn't really find the fourth. So we went out to do magnetometer and resistivity survey on within this rust stop because obviously this is a sensitive area, right? We no longer go and disturb burials unless we would absolutely have to. So again, here's a great instance where we can employ the remote sensing equipment in a non-invasive manner, right? We don't have to dig, and we're going to learn about the extent of the deposits on the site, what's happened to it, and then advise IDOT on how to move forward and best manage these. So if we look at the site with an aerial photo, the yellow is the survey grids that we marked out. We mapped it there. All the red were locations of trees that we plotted in because the tree roots can drop down and create disturbance. So we wanted to be able to sort out the cultural from the natural disturbances. LiDAR, I'm sure you guys are familiar with LiDAR. This is a great tool here. Again, it allows us to strip away the vegetation. And so you look at the aerial photo, you look at the LiDAR, boy, you can really see three big conical mounds there. And this one here, you can even see a small dimple in the top where a looter or somebody had dug into it in the past. So we set up our survey grid and we got to work. Um, and we did some magnetometer. So here's the grid and the magnetometer results that I overlaid on that LiDAR photo. But if we take a look at that, what it's really showing us is down here is a really uh, highly visible linear feature that has a very strong magnetic response to it. Uh, that's a utility line that was run through that site probably in the 1970s. So this here is this what we call a large dipole. That's probably a large piece of metal. Again, sometimes we're picking up recent disturbances, and that clouded a lot of our response, okay, because it was so strong. But we were seeing lots of small responses here. So here's one of our mounds. We only did the magnetometer on the portions of this site here, but we can see smaller dipole responses. And this is part of the mound here uh, that allow us that these are probably small prehistoric pit features that are still present in the immediate vicinity around the mounds. Magnetometer kind of worked good here. We often use multiple instruments on the same site because each of these instruments gives us a little bit different response or a little bit different view on the subsurface conditions. So we went back over it and we hit it with soil resistivity. And this was our survey grid here in green, and we were able to go over the whole mounds. Because of the vegetations and the trees, it was too hard to maneuver that magnetometer with those two big sensors in it through those trees and through that vegetation. So sometimes the surface cover limits us. Uh, the resistivity was a little easier to get in amongst the weeds and brushes and around the trees. So we were able to do that. Combined with, so this had really, really interesting results. So here is the big mound that we saw before. And this dark, heavy response is the mound fill. What we're seeing here, this brighter one, is an area of lower resistance. That's the looter's pit. But then what we see down here is another response. And here we can see the other mound. We also see a subtle curving kind of feature down here. And then we have this obvious bigger response here with this lighter ring in here. So these are lower and higher magnetic responses. Um, what this is really telling us is that we've got our looter's pit, but we've also got the remnant of a central log tomb that we are able to detect that is buried deep in the subsurface of that mound there. They drove a shaft probably into part of it, but we can say that part of it is still probably intact or less disturbed. We have another one here in this mound, uh, just to the southwest. And if you notice, they're both on that same kind of alignment. Okay. So that tells us they're contemporaneous or built with by the same group. They're both laid out in that same fashion. What we can also see here is boom, another probable mound, another mound. And when you look at this on the surface, it only presents as one large mound, but over time, this was three smaller conical mounds that were built in succession and then eventually conglomerated into one large mound that we can see today. So here we're able to now look at the sequence of mound construction and know something about that. This one looks relatively intact and undisturbed. Um, and then down here again, so there was four reported mounds. We have two visible. This is the third one here, and you can barely see it on the surface when you're at the park. It's a very subtle rise, but we were able to define that as yes, that's probably very likely a mound. IDOT, you don't want to be running utility lines through the area anymore, et cetera, et cetera. Um, so here, this was a really nice example where the two different types of instrumentation gave us different looks. One worked better than the other just because of the nature of the site itself. But here we really learned an awful lot about this mound group without having to put a shovel into the ground. So for me, this was just the absolute funnest part is like, well, we can see that sequence of mound buildings. There's three small separate conical mounds and then turned into one large mound. In the past, we would have had to do an immense amount of disturbance to the site to learn this. And you have to remember that archaeology, even when we're doing it professionally, we're essentially destroying the site, you know, and we're taking it apart, but you can't ever put that back again, right? That's why we were so careful with maps and notes and documentation because we have to reverse engineer it all and document it. Um, Here we can learn about this and preserve the resource. So non-invasive. Noble Weeding, this is a really, really cool site. I'm interested in the really early guys, the Ice Age hunter-gatherers, and I'm interested in the really late cultures up in Northeast Illinois, and Langford is one of them. They're they're a really distinctive culture that's dates to about 12 to 1300 AD. They make a really distinctive pottery. It's when everybody else down at like Cahokia Mounds, the Mississippians, they're making fancy shell-tempered pottery. These Langford guys stick with the older forms of tempering like grit and crushed rock. And they make this really distinctive, what we call Langford um, pottery and big globular round vessels with some distinct surface treatments. And then they're really well known for mm, the Upper Illinois River over to the Rock, the Fox, the Des Plaines, the Kankakee. They're really very well centered in the northeast part of the state. Except for occasionally you get sites way out in the middle of nowhere, and Noble Weeding is one of those. It had classic Lanford tradition pottery, but it's all the way down by Bloomington, well out of the normal distribution range. And so people had known about this site and it had a little bit of professional work done in 1970s. They cut some big backhoe trenches through it, exposed some features. It turned out to be a master's thesis that was hard to find and access. So people knew about this site, but we didn't know much about it. But the question is, what are these Langford guys doing way out of where we normally find them? So there's a interesting question we can ask. Sometimes archaeological sites don't look they look like a cornfield, right? This is the site. You would never know it, right? Other than the fact that there's a scatter of chipstone debris on the surface and a little bit of pottery. At one point, there was a low burial mound apparently here that has since been plowed away. That mound is what attracted the early antiquarians and collectors and investigators to the site because they could see the mound, right? But otherwise, it just looks like an empty field. Well, we knew the site was there, but we really didn't know very much about it. This was one of the first sites we got out to. I think this was 2016 when with our brand new magnetometer that we had talked the then director Tom Emerson into buying for a lot of money, and he was kind of saying, "You guys, I hope this works. This better work." So we got out there and we laid our grids out here. As you can see, our survey tapes and grids. We also had these were our two first pieces of equipment: the gradiometer and the magnetic susceptibility survey. We went out, we did the survey, and holy cow! Uh, this is a map of the gradiometry, the magnetometer survey. Off to the left here, this is the farm field that you access here. That's where our cars are. This whole site here is this. What we found was a large ring settlement of houses, very large houses, 4 or 5 meters on the side. You can see these houses here very clearly, arranged around a central plaza that doesn't have anything. This is the first time anybody had seen a Langford phase settlement in this kind of detail. Uh, all of these black dots are large storage pits. We can clearly see these houses here, and you can even see these black dots, internal hearths and pit features inside the houses. It was just astounding. There's a little house way out here. But it was just plain as day. This was the X-ray glasses moment of my childhood as an archaeologist. Um, Needless to say, our heads were off the chopping block with Tom, and we sold him on the efficacy of geophysics, and he was a fan after that. Um, we also did magnetic susceptibility on this as well. But here's a kind of a marked up image on the magnetometry. The yellow are all the houses that we were able to image. So you can see the structures with internal features on those structures. You can see just so many these big swarms of big storage pits here, possibly a palisade wall or a curtain to screen, potentially a special use structure. Uh, Again, all of this without putting a single shovel into the ground. We learned more about Langford phase settlements and villages in one day than we had in 75 years with this study. Well, we went back and we hit it with a gradiometer. And again, this gave us a slightly different picture. So we imaged a portion of the site with the gradiometer. That gave us even more houses. So in the red are houses that we saw with the magnetic susceptibility unit that we did not see with the magnetometer. What we also saw are these big black smudges That's midden area. That's area of soil that had been that's been magnetically enhanced by organic matter. So all our little microbes eating the organic matter and pooping out iron enriched deposit, they've enriched that soil. So we were able to, you know, see even more houses with this. So again, each of these instruments gives us some detect things better than others. And so we always try to hit it in two different views or more if we can. This is kind of hard to see here, but on the red, this is the areas that were previously investigated in like the 70s. And so, yeah, they had big trenches out in the middle of nowhere into the central plaza, which was devoid of archaeological deposits. And they just by happenstance hit a house or two and some pits. And so they just thought, well, maybe there's just not a whole lot at this site. Um, but again, we, it was just, it was one of those moments like, wow. We did go out and conduct some excavations at the site to, what we call ground truth, but we were able to drop right in on one of these houses here. And so what you see on this uh, is, I believe it is this structure here that we knew exactly where that was. We were able to drop right in on it, not disturb any more of the site than we needed to, and we defined this very large house basin here. So these guys would dig out the basins of their house a couple of feet deep into the ground, for cooler in the summer, warmer in the winter. And then they had these entrance ramps, big exterior storage pits. This we haven't excavated down into the house yet, but we knew there was going to be a big pit here. You can kind of see it. We knew there was going to be a big pit in each corner, right? Our X-ray glasses were telling us what we were going to find. This is a cross section of this pit right here, what we ended up calling Feature 49. It was absolutely chock full of burned earth. You can see that discoloration there. Charcoal, uh, burned organic matter, pottery, and jammed full of elk bone. This site has yielded more elk than any other site in the entire state. So it's like, okay, well, what are these guys doing way out in the middle of nowhere for typical Langford range? Maybe they're hunting elk. The interesting thing about this site is we see a mixture of pottery styles. It's not just Langford, but we see some pottery that's connected to Cahokia to the south. So we've got potentially two ethnic groups occupying the site together, or maybe sequentially. That's one of the big questions we're still trying to figure out. But here's yours truly holding what's called a beamer. That's an elk bone, and that's a hide working tool for scraping and cleaning hides, and that's what you see hanging out of the profile of feature 49 right there, along with a large piece of Langford pottery and other things. But again, you can see we dropped right in on that house. We knew exactly where it was. We had a very good idea of what we were going to encounter. It allowed us to zero in and learn an awful lot really fast. And these are nice at the top, nice drone views. That's another great technology that we've been putting to use that provides some really fun imagery. Um, but this was a great case of like, oh, we learn more, in one day on this site than 75 years of other research. And we were able to target it and go right in and be conscientious about not disturbing the site any more than we had to. Yeah, just one of those fun sites that you ruins you for other sites because it was so amazing. Let's jump forward a little bit. 1752, Fort Deschartres. Has anybody ever been down to this historic site? It's actually very cool. They've rebuilt based on archaeological excavations and archaeological evidence the footprint and the outline of a 1752 French stone fort. This was the only surviving structure here up until the 1950s or so, that dated back to the 1750s. That was the battery where they stored all the gunpowder and everything. So the walls on it were like 5 foot thick. Uh, so that's why that stood for so long. But with a lot of sites, they get abandoned and they fall into disuse. People come and they take all of that material away and reuse it somewhere else. So all of the original stone walls and buildings of the fort got carted off and carried into the neighboring towns and was reused. But they have recreated or rebuilt a lot of the foundations for the barracks and the officers' residence and things like that, and the fort walls itself, based on actual archaeological evidence. However, the village of Chartres in 1720. This was basically the administrative center of the Illinois country for the French. This is where they were centered to control the Midwest and the Mississippi. And it's really about the fur trade and the Native American relations. But this was the nerve center of the French occupation of North America in 1720. 1717, uh, gets Illinois country gets annexed to French Louisiana, and they build their first fort, which is reported as a wooden fort. Was built, and then this is it's the Mississippi. It it gets wet and floods down there. They built that fort in not the greatest location. They had to rebuild it in 1732, and then they got tired of it getting flooded and washed out. And they moved it in 1750 and built the stone fort, which is the one that we know about today. And then that got turned over to the British. They used it from 1765 until 1771. Then it was abandoned, and then it becomes part of the U.S. Illinois becomes part of the U.S. Holdings. So actually, they knew about a first fort. They didn't really know much about that third fort, and they didn't know where any of these were until 1928. They start flying historic the aerial photos of the entire state, and in the 60s, a researcher noticed this really unusual dark stain out here. The stone fort is down here, but just a little bit north, they noticed this dark stain, and it fits the dimensions and the layout of a classic French wooden fort, which has these pointy bastions on the corners, and that's called the Vauban fortification. And so they thought this is here. This is fort. This is the missing fort. This is now what's been called the Lawrence site. Um, so here's the location of modern day. Here's our stone fort, and you can see they've reconstructed those classic French bastions at each corner there. And you go just up the road, and they use this area for parking cars all the time and festival, this and that. This is now we were able to georeference the location of the 1928 aerial photo, and confirm the Lawrence site. It is we didn't know is that just and there had been some work done in there in the 70s and 80s, confirmed it's definitely a French occupation in the 1700s, but they just didn't know if that was connected with this fort. So we went out and did a little bit of work out there, and in 2012 we did some initial testing and came across again, this was mechanical in nature, where you have to open up backhoe trenches and things, but based on surface scatters. But here you can see that probably just clipped into one of the corners of a fort. Uh, and so there's the northeast bastion, and so some of this is hard to interpret but there was clearly internal features for storage, and probably maybe fencing, or something located outside of the bastion. Often the French like to have what's called a glacis, or a big open area where nothing happens, in 50 yards or 100 yards of the fort, because that's your field of fire. So maybe this is some fencing or maybe drain tiles or something. So based on that, and knowing that we had one corner over here, we went and did a gradiometry study over on the other side of the road. And we found that probably the circa 1730 confirmed that this is the third Fort de Chartres. Um, And so the first one was probably completely destroyed. It's been washed away by the Mississippi when they rebuilt it in 1730. They move it up onto slightly higher ground. After rebuilding this one twice, it gets washed away. They finally smarten up. They move this, and this is the third fort. Nobody knew there was a third fort, but we can pretty much confirm it. Here we've got again these two large metal. These are probably rebar that was punched into the ground by an earlier survey, and we have a big magnetic response on those. But you can see here there are really nicely defined linear features and big, dipole responses. But we've got these nice lines here that probably correspond with the outline of the fort and internal features of the fort. This is probably a gated entrance here, like a baffled gate. So here's your entrance into the fort, but you often offset or make narrow entrances into the fort so that an opposing force would get bottlenecked, and you can, slow them down here. But we've got really nice internal features. Large cellar here probably, but we can see the walls of the fort. This is the present day levee that overrides the south end of the fort. But again, this was without doing any excavation, versus going over to the other side where we had to use a backhoe. And essentially, it's a lot more disruptive. That we can now advise the IDNR who manages Fort de Chartres. It's like, you probably don't want to be running cars over this, or make sure utility lines, and that this is obviously a really important archaeological deposit over here. So again, don't have to, disrupt it. It's about preservation. It's about land management, and advising the landowners about how do we take care of these things for the next guys who are going to have even cooler things at their disposal. If I can do this, it's like, gee, what's the next young kid going to come up with? So, um, we this would be a great case to come back and use a couple of different instruments out there. Our magnetic susceptibility or resistivity. There's lots of metal here, right? Um, and see what that tells us. But again, here you can see this really lots of noise in here inside this, and then really clean outside of that. That tells you we've got these nice kind of boundaries that are probably walls, activity inside versus outside. All right, so let's visit Sangamo Town really briefly here, where Abraham Lincoln lived and worked. And again, this was the rival for the state capital with Springfield, and it dates to about 1825 to 1835. Uh, they were a local businessman, shall we say, was in charge of taking political notaries around to evaluate Springfield and Sangamo as to what would be the potential better capital. This Sangamo sits right on the Sangamon River. Um, he had vested business interests more in Springfield, so he took them on the most roundabout, difficult way he could possibly do to get to Sangamo. And they ended up going, oh, this is too hard to get to. We're going to go to Springfield. And by 18, everybody went then left Sangamo, and by 1855, this site had disappeared completely. So it's a really nice, really cool time capsule of a very early and relatively, we hoped, undisturbed occupation. One of the historians who was then working for us at the time, Bob Masrum, did a lot of the archival research. He and Curtis Mann narrowed down the kind of suspected location of Sangamo Town, and they went out and started to do that survey and those shovel tests and came on to this area of artifacts that were the right time frame and did a little bit of investigation and basically said, yeah, this is Sangamo. We went out and did a magnetic survey, and again, you look at it today, you would never know there was a town here, right? It just looks like a cornfield. You would walk right by this. But that magnetic survey, you can see all of those little dipole responses, clusters of them. That's the noise. And again, that's telling us some of these are things that Bob had previously investigated and some features. Uh, we can see there are hundreds of these things out there. It's been kind of plow disturbed, right? And spread out, but we can definitely see there's a big cluster here, a big cluster here, one down here. These are probably, we do know that they're representing structures. And this town extends over into, unsurveyed area. But again, just 2 days. This was 2 days this is probably about 8 to 10 person days worth of effort to just, again, we learned more in 1 or 2 days than we had previously about a really cool town and one that's got a connection to early Abe Lincoln. But again, you would never know it. But here's our X-ray glasses. This is a really cool one. Archival research shows that again, so we see these clusters, and this is when we really cleaned up and fine-tuned the data. It's really clear that we can see probably what is the debris and the disturbances associated with structures out at the site. They probably didn't have big cellars or subsurface footprints. They're definitely wooden frame buildings, but up on footers and things like that. So again, we're learning something probably about the nature of the architecture out here as well, just by looking at this. Um, but we do know there was a blacksmith out there, and archival research said, yeah, this is probably the lot that the blacksmith owned. Um, so lots of metal noise, and we went over that with the magnetometry uh, or the magnetic susceptibility. And again, you can see we have these really neat. This is 25 centimeters deep. This is 50 centimeters deep. We probably do have a shallow subsurface cellar down under here. We don't see it with the magnetometer, but we can see it with this. When you think about blacksmithing, right? All of the charcoal and the burning and the ash were really organically enhancing that soil. So again, that's why the magnetic susceptibility unit worked so nicely out here and saw it in a different view than we could with the magnetometer. Um, we have lots more of this kind of, we have lots of videos up on our website. We have a series, Archaeology in Minutes. So if your attention span is short like mine, and I've talked for longer than I intended to, but there's plenty of videos, including one of a younger version of myself talking when we were first out at Noble Weeding, and then some of the geophysical testing at Fort Chart. Get on our website, and there's lots of resources. We also have tons and tons of free publications that you can download that we've done over the years. And thank you. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody has. And thanks for bearing with me.
You could have gone on for hours. That, I mean, yeah, you
Really.
just barely, literally scratched the surface. Um,
No, we didn't
and the
scratch
pun
the
intended.
surface.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yeah.
We didn't
I
have.
am fascinated. I mean, that's like the first time you take the LiDAR over the and you see everything underneath the trees, and this is now everything under under the ground. And wow. But how do you, without digging down, how do you make the jump from I see a black spot to knowing an educated guess that it is the blacksmith? How do you make that?
In the case of a place like Sangamo Town, we have the benefit of the written record, right? Archival research that we know the blacksmith, we know his name, we know the approximate location of his lot in the town. Um, there's written descriptions of who owned what, but there's no legal plats of anything, but we're able to kind of reconstruct that. So it's like if this is the blacksmith, we know that so and so lived in the next building over. Now, right? And so by looking at like that particularly noisy cluster and then hitting it with the magnetic susceptibility and seeing all of that, like really enriched area go and then some of the surface collections where there was a lot of slag and metal waste, uh, pretty good argument that that's probably the blacksmith location, right? And then we can work outwards from there. Um, But in the case of Noble Weeding, we did ground truthing, as we call it. We follow that up with some excavation. But again, it allows us. In the past, it was again, it would be, it's boy, there's a lot of stuff on the surface here. Let's just put a test unit here and see what happens. Now it's like, okay, I know the center of this feature is right here. We can drop right in on it, literally, right down on top of it.
It's
Saves a
amazing how
lot
the
of
color.
time, effort, money, and it protects, it's better for the resource as well.
I thought it was amazing how this you can actually see the change in the soil that matches exactly what you were seeing, and you can now see it in the building. I mean, that just like wow, that is so cool.
It's like
Yeah,
playing Battleship.
like sometimes when it works, like at Noble Weeding, again, it's like it's just that's a spectacular example. But
Hmm.
we've got um, we've got some younger staff that are very interested in the Central Illinois River Valley, which has a number of large Mississippian settlements up there, and there's a number of these folks, and they've been systematically geophysing these as part of dissertation research, and we're seeing large palisaded towns, some of which get built and then burnt and then rebuilt and with a palisade wall around them. So we're seeing, the layout of these towns and the destruction and the rebuilding, and it's telling something about the social landscape in the 12th century. Um, and some of those are absolutely spectacular too. But in the past, Orendorf is one of these towns. It was salvaged over the number of years with an unbelievable amount of labor and effort. Uh, it was going to get destroyed by the strip mining that happens over there. And they basically just stripped the entire site, acres and acres and acres of it. They found four rebuilt settlements, but the effort there, took years and years, and you had to strip all the topsoil off and expose hundreds of structures and learn about the layout that way. If they had geophys like that, we could have done that in a week.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's gratifying to have gotten this section up and running and now having younger staff members that have really taken the mantle and run with it and are really proficient at this and interested in it. And we're really attacking really cool questions about the archaeological record of the Illinois landscape. But in a way, you can learn a lot fast, and you're preserving the record as you're learning about it too. So,
Are you excavating, any of it, or is it just, the test pits or whatever that you dig that you're just to confirm what's down there?
Noble weeding has been a long-term uh, project with ISAS and ISU out of Bloomington. They've been conducting summer field schools there over the site over the last number of years and excavating a number of the structures. We're pinpointing structures that are more susceptible to plow damage and erosion. So it's like
That would make sense.
right, the part of the site is, more downhill and he's eroding and more susceptible to the plow. So we're going after those first while they're still there. We've also brought in uh, tribal partners to see what their interest in questions at that site about their descendant connections and as a partnership kind of there. We regularly excavate a lot of features. We now use this on regularly on our IDOT projects to pinpoint, like farmsteads. Do they have cellars and outhouses, and what part of those are in the right of way and are going to be destroyed by IDOT work, and target those. And or IDOT sometimes will narrow their right of way right there and preserve it in place if we can. So.
Like the fort where the road goes right through it, you know?
Right. Or the utility mound or utility line running through burial
Mhm.
mounds, right? So again, our job is to provide IDOT with information for best practices because we have to balance preservation with infrastructure needs.
I found myself just cracking up thinking about the mounds, and I spend a lot of time from September through November sitting up on Green Valley Mound, uh, looking for migrating hawks, but that is built on a garbage dump. It is a mound built on a garbage dump, and I found myself just laughing, thinking, in a couple hundred years, somebody's going to go moving some equipment over the top of that and looking down on this pile of garbage and trying to figure out what were people doing. I mean,
Well, like I said, that's the great thing about garbage. It doesn't lie. I might be able to ask Chris, like, oh, what do you eat or drink? Oh, I'm a vegan and I don't drink alcohol. We go kick his garbage can over, and holy cow, it's full of fried chicken and empty vodka bottles, right?
Mhm.
Garbage doesn't lie. People lie, but garbage doesn't.
yeah.
And these are the things that are left behind and generated by everyday life, by people in the past. And archaeology is meant to fill in the gap when that written record doesn't exist, right? And so we use the leftovers, the remains of our material culture of the people to try to learn about it and fill in those gaps there. So
Yeah. That's fascinating. I think it's so cool to see that. But the one, the Noble, we
Noble
can
Wheaton.
match perfectly. It's like, wow.
Yeah, that was a home run when we needed it because we had just spent an awful lot of money on that equipment, and Tom Emerson was not a believer until we downloaded that data, and Bob and I looked at each other and went,
Yeah. And it's just a field, an open field.
You would never know. I mean, you would know
Yeah.
it's an archaeological site there. There's chipstones, and people have collected hundreds of arrowheads over the years off of it, but visibly, it just looks like a cornfield. I mean, you would never know there was a major village there 800 years ago.
That's so cool. So what is I'm always curious what your answer is on this. How old is not old enough to be digging around
Um,
burial sites. Because
uh,
you're looking at that one town, and that's not that old, you
right.
know.
But
But
So,
that was, yeah,
so
that wasn't a burial site. So
right, that's a very for the state, 1820 and 1850 is early, right? That's the cusp of history. Written records that exist there, but they're not great. And we're still in the era of um, folk craft, right? Local production by artisans, by like an individual blacksmith or an individual potter, right? We're in the pre-mass produced goods era. So we learn a lot about regional kind of idiosyncratic crafts, manufacture, trade. What do people have available? How are they adapting it to their local traditions? How are they reusing things? By the time the post-Civil War period and the trains come through, yeah, everybody's getting access to the same thing, right? I say, boy, 1880s, 1920s, I don't need to dig a site. I can just open the Sears catalog. Um, and by then we often have such good historical documentation that we're not doing what archaeology needs to do. We're illustrating what we know. um, which has a place and a purpose, but for IDOT, who has laws to comply with, and I have to make that decision of like, do we excavate the site or not, and be judicious with the taxpayer dollars. It's like, will we learn anything from the site that we don't already know? Yes or no? Is there something
right.
special about this site? Was it associated with a particular person? So Sangamo, Abe Lincoln, boom, yeah, it meets one of the criteria for what we call National Register of Historic Places. Is it a prehistoric site that contains intact deposits full of preserved plant and animal remains, which tell us about diet and practice and how they built their houses? Noble weeding, boom, yes, that's criteria D, archaeological evidence. Um, there's plenty of archaeological sites that I wouldn't recommend we do any further work at, because it's like more than knowing maybe about how old it is and its location. Um, we probably wouldn't get much more out of that. And so not every site is created equal, is I guess what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Um, with burials, all burials and unmarked burials are protected by state law. You can't knowingly disturb them. So again, how do we look at something like Nadine Mounds, um, and gather information without disturbing it and violating the law? I had to get a permit from the state burial program coordinator just to do that remote sensing even. But we learned that, like, oh, that one mound is intact, and it's not just one mound, it's three different mounds that turned into one mound. And so and yeah, there are probably small pits and things associated in that immediate vicinity. So IDOT just, stay as far away and don't disturb the ground here, or plant trees, or build a pavilion or something like that. We can help them manage that resource.
That's interesting. I love the way the graves, if you will, were aligned.
Yeah, isn't that
Mhm.
cool?
Is
Yeah,
it
That's
we
really
looked at
cool.
that and
And
we're like, oh man, they're both on that same alignment,
what
which
Yeah.
tells
what
you something.
alignment was it?
Yeah.
Basically kind of a northeast to southwest alignment.
Wasn't like a solstice alignment or anything.
I don't know. Yeah,
Okay.
you could probably get some archaeoastronomer to look at that, does it match up with anything, an equinox or solstice, or these guys, they got math problems programs that can
Mhm.
now wind back the positions of the stars, from precession to where they actually were 2,000
Mhm.
years ago, and check the alignment then. So um, that'd be somebody nerdier than me could do that.
But that is pretty cool that they do align like that. That is just like, wow.
Right. So then we can make that assumption that these mounds are contemporaneous, right?
Hmm.
They have some shared qualities.
Yeah. And people would, I mean, stopping there at a rest stop wouldn't even know. I mean, you're just like,
Well, they've got signage there, and we
yeah,
help them with to update that signage and make it a little more appropriate and informative and accurate. So
For that looter's pit on the one mound, are you surmising it's a looter's pit, or is there something that tells you that's likely what that was, that concavity?
it's almost assuredly it's very rare that you don't find a mound that doesn't look like a donut because the
Yeah,
central portions of it's been dug out. So
sure,
it's got a distinct in it that may have been dug 50 years ago or more,
sure.
and it's still dimpled down at
Yeah,
the top. You can see it.
yeah, right. Okay. Interesting. Very
yeah,
cool.
that is. So what is the most interesting? I mean, obviously that one is a really big one, the Noble, but what's the most interesting thing that you have seen using this latest technology?
Um, we've been out on a couple of these Mississippian sites in the central Illinois River Valley that we know very, very little about. But one of them you could clearly see a palisade line, a series of wooden posts. They had fortified this site with bastions, so little square enclosures built in, but at very regular intervals across the wall line. And if you look at the distance between them, they're about half the distance for a hand-drawn bow of that kind, the range of lethality. So they're spacing these
Ah,
things apart for overlapping fields of fire. So little things like that you can see. Um, we worked on a historic site where it had a very light expression on the surface, but the documents told us it was about 1830s. And we went out with Geophys and it just found a beautiful cellar and two outbuildings, and including the remnant of a handmade brick uh, fireplace foundation with that you could see, and it dated to about 1820. Um, and we had no idea that was there until we did the geophys, and so yeah, it's hard to pick one
Yeah,
because yeah, it just every
it's all
time
cool.
you don't know what you're gonna see, but
do you ever get a lot people resistant to letting you do that because they know that, ah, man, I'm never going to be able to use this field to plow again?
Um, generally, no. By the time we're coming through, IDOT has already done their land acquisition, or we get permission to go out and test. And most people are like, "Oh, you're going to help them replace that bridge over there? Oh, please." So, yeah, we do a lot of projects in advance of small bridge replacement. Our infrastructure is most of it's 100 years too old already. And so people are anxious to see these roads fixed and bridge replaced or a culvert that keeps washing out fixed. So,
Well, one very important question I know a bunch of these people in this group are wondering about it is which one of these technologies would locate iron siderite the best? That's what all of the concretions,
Was on
the
Creek.
fossils that we're
um,
looking for are.
the
And that was,
magnetometer does not like big metal things. So that's very sensitive to metal objects. So anything with iron enriched, that magnetometer would see pretty nicely.
yeah, yeah.
GPR is the same. I used to do a lot of work in historic cemeteries with GPR to locate unmarked burials. Uh, artificial flowers with metal wire stems made it some of these nearly impossible because there was so much interference that you just couldn't see
Mhm.
past it.
Yeah, yeah. I've done that with metal detector, going out with the metal detector, and you just
Right.
run into so much trash. Yeah, you can't
Yeah, trying to uh,
if you
doing
don't have a.
geophys on post-Civil War sites is we don't do much because we've tended to shy away from post-Civil War because again, it's like the archaeology of us. We can read about it, but there's
Mhm.
so much iron on those sites because of the supply is so plentiful by then that there's so much background interference and noise from the metal on there that the readings aren't very good.
Well, and Alan, what you're going to end up with a lot of coprolites because it's the
Yep,
poop
that's
that,
true.
yeah.
Well, not coprolites. I was thinking of pyrite is what I thought you were starting to say. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, outhouses show up very nicely.
yeah.
Well, it's interesting because there was an article I read not too long ago about how the people that dig through the mud around the rivers in England and they vie for that, and it's similar to finding the old stuff and bringing it up, and
Yeah,
but you guys are doing it
mudlarking.
without digging.
Mudlarking. Yep, yep. My
Yeah,
wife watches those YouTube videos. Yep.
Yeah. What we have to remember is that context is very important. If we found something out at Sangamo Town metal detecting and or just a stray metal detector is out there and he picks up all of these things and then doesn't keep that record, right? They become objects. They can't be that little piece of the story that informs us about, 1820s, 1830s Illinois. But yeah, things
yeah.
like mudlarking where it's in a very displaced secondary context. Um, they're neat. They illustrate, right, the past. Okay, they can't tell us about a specific time or place or event necessarily, but they can illustrate something from that era, and that has appeal to people. Um,
So, how soon until we get the equipment that will allow you to stand over an area and then do the 3D image down underground so you can see the whole structure
Okay.
underground as it is in 3D
Not as it is,
imaging?
as it was.
Yeah.
we we've got a couple of really smart people on staff that do a lot of computer modeling, and they're starting to think about how do we apply AI to the data interpretation from geophysics. And we're creating our own models where we'll say, okay, um, this anomaly here with this kind of geomagnetic reading turned out to be a pit full of burned charcoal. This one here turned out to be a pit full of ceramics. So we're giving the AI some baseline and learning, right? That and then to see how AI does for uh, interpreting the geomagnetic data rather than us having to look at it. And it's the eye of experience that allows us to pick out little lines and walls and mark things up, right? Um, I suspect AI is going to move us to the next step in the interpretation of geophysics data.
I think I
Very,
probably will.
very well done. Fascinating.
Yeah, yeah, fascinating.
Again, thank you for the invite. I like talking about this stuff. I think it's cool and fun, and so it's nice to find another group. And it's hard to kick me off my soapbox once I get up there, and
Mhm.
I get wound up. So I appreciate everybody, your attention and choosing to spend a little time here tonight. So
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. And I'm definitely going to ask you to come back on other things because once I started reading